Welcome! In this explainer, we're going to dive into a really fundamental question in development economics. Just how much does the very land a nation is built on shape its path to prosperity? We're going to explore how geography can act as this powerful and sometimes, invisible barrier to economic progress.
So, at the heart of our discussion is a question that's absolutely central to your economic syllabus. When we look around the world, we see these huge differences in wealth. And one of the oldest explanations for this doesn't look at policy or culture, but it looks at the map itself.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll unpack the big idea, which is the geography hypothesis. Then we'll look at two really specific barriers, physical isolation and the burden of health and climate. And finally, we'll tackle that big question, is geography really destiny?
All right, let's jump right in with our first section, the geography hypothesis. Now, this is a pretty powerful theory. It suggests that a region's economic story was actually set in motion thousands of years ago, shaped in a fundamental way by its physical characteristics.
So what does this hypothesis really say? Well, in a nutshell, it argues that the starting hand a society was dealt by nature, things like fertile soil, easy access to rivers, available natural resources, all of this created initial advantages that have just compounded over centuries, setting the stage for long-term growth.
And this concept, which you will often see linked to thinkers like Jared Diamond, gives us a really powerful example of this idea in action. The argument is that a place like Eurasia got a massive head start simply because of a geographic lottery. It just happened to be home to lots of plants and animals that were easy to domesticate. And this wasn't just about having more food. It was about creating an agricultural surplus, which then freed up people to specialize in other things. And that specialization, that's the bedrock of economic complexity. It leads to innovation and eventually more advanced societies.
Okay, so that historical perspective brings us to a more modern and direct barrier, physical isolation. Because while those early advantages were all about what you had locally, in today's globalized world, success is hugely dependent on your access to the global marketplace.
And here's the key insight. Distance on a map isn't just distance. It's money. It translates directly into economic cost. Research from economists like Redding and Venables shows that market access is absolutely critical. Being far away from the world's major economic centers is like having a tax on all your trade. It makes every single import more expensive and every export less competitive. It's a constant drag on growth. Now, this problem gets even more intense when we talk about landlocked countries. They face this really unique structural hurdle. Their ability to trade with the rest of the world is completely dependent on the political stability and the quality of infrastructure of their neighbors. So you've got higher transport costs, plus you have to deal with border delays and relying on other countries. It just adds all these extra layers of risk and expense.
And this table just lays it out perfectly. If you're a coastal nation, trade friction is pretty minimal. But for a landlocked nation, every single step adds cost and time. And remember, this isn't a one-off problem. It's a persistent disadvantage that makes it harder to attract investment and plug into those global value chains. All right, so far we've talked about moving goods, but now let's shift our focus to something even more important, the well-being of people. Geography presents another critical barrier through its influence on climate and health, which has a direct impact on a country's most valuable economic asset, its human capital. The argument here, and this is something economist Jeffrey Sachs has written a lot about, is that certain climates, especially in the tropics, create these fundamental challenges for public health and even for farming that can really hold back economic progress. Okay, before we go further, let's just be really clear on what we mean by human capital. It's not just about how many years you spend in school. It's the whole package, the education, the skills, the experience, and, crucially, the good health of a country's workforce. Put simply, a sick workforce just can't be a productive one.
Think about diseases like malaria, which are common in many tropical regions. Their economic impact is just devastating. It's a chain reaction. They reduce how productive workers can be, they force governments and families to spend huge amounts of money on healthcare, and tragically, they have a huge impact on child development. A kid who's sick all the time is going to miss school, making it harder to build up that human capital, and that can trap communities in this awful cycle of poor health and low income.
Okay, so we've looked at some pretty significant barriers, right? From historical disadvantages to modern-day trade isolation to a persistent disease burden. And all of that brings us to a really crucial question. Is a country's fate basically sealed by its spot on the map?
And the crucial takeaway here is that the answer is a definite no. While geography might deal the initial hand, it is not an inescapable destiny. Things like good institutions, Adopting new technology and smart economic policy are incredibly powerful forces that can overcome these challenges. Just think of Botswana, a landlocked country that managed strong growth because of good governance. Or look at Singapore, a tiny resource-poor island that became a global economic powerhouse.
So that leaves us with our final, forward-looking question. If geography is a hurdle but not a cage, what are the keys that can unlock a country's potential? Well, in the next part of this series, we're going to explore exactly that. We'll look at the roles that institutions, policy choices, and technology play in shaping development and see how they can help nations overcome the very challenges we've outlined today.